Hello, psychology students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Module 12, Effects of Stress. So, stress. This is the process by which we perceive and respond to certain events called stressors that we appraise as threatening or challenging. It's called stress. And it is a subfield of psychology um, that focuses on stress and well-beings and health. Is actually now called health psychology. And truth is, we're all faced with different stresses on a day-to-day basis. You could have a situation where maybe you lock your keys in your car, you forget your phone, and you kind of panic, and it kind of changes the course of your day. A lot of it is how we appraise it and how we respond to it. What might be stressful for one person may not necessarily be as stressful for the next. So, responding to stress. The psychologist who researched a reoccurring response to stress that he called the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS, was called Hans Selye. Hans, for the most part, came up with this general adaptation syndrome as a way to kind of help us understand how we have these adapted responses to stress. And he actually saw that it happens in three different stages. First of all, we have this time of alarm where our body realizes or prepares or mobilizes itself to deal with the stress. So it could be such a thing where I have a student come in and maybe they didn't hear the announcement that we have a test or a quiz today, and there's that moment where that student might panic. Okay. Following that, there is this resistance. When our body tries to resist the stress and may try to adapt to it. So typically when we have stressors that are a little bit more enduring and long lasting, at some point in time, we have to build up our defenses, but it can take a toll on us. And eventually we go into this period of exhaustion, meaning that after resisting the stress that's coming up, our body's coping mechanism can't handle it any longer. It's no longer sufficient to fight the stress. And our body falls apart, meaning that we either become extremely exhausted or we're to the point where we are not able to fight um, illnesses and things like that might, we might come in contact with. So the flood of stress hormones accompanying these traumatic events appears to correspond with the shrinking of the brain structure known as the hippocampus. Remember, you'll never forget the hippocampus. Has a lot to do with basically condensing our memory experiences. Anyway, this brain structure is vital for memory recall, and those experiencing the trauma may experience some kind of memory difficulties as a result of that. So, stressful events are daily stressors. The most significant source of stress may be the everyday hassles that we face. So, if you have to deal with a teacher or a boss, or if you're dealing with traffic issues, all of that are our daily stresses. We have physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion brought on by this persistent job related stress. It's sometimes referred to as burnout. And burnout can result in things like depression. Part of that is from your emotional exhaustion. You might also experience a decrease in your performance or productivity, meaning that you have a physical exhaustion from that. And then finally, there may be cynicism, which is from kind of the mental exhaustion that comes from this. Significant changes. Sometimes when we have the death of a loved one, or when you leave home, or if perhaps maybe you're dealing with divorce or maybe loss of a job, these things can create stress in our lives. Catastrophes, things like go back here, like weather events. So, like if you've gone through a hurricane, terror attack, earthquakes, all of these kind of things can really take a toll on us physically. Catastrophes typically mean prolonged exposure to stress. All right, so some remedies and ways to prevent burnout. When we feel like we're kind of experiencing these things, we should ask for help. We need to look at our priorities. We need to take a check of our diet, maybe take some time off, vacation, meditate or prayer, maybe talk to someone who is a really good listener. Okay, sometimes that might mean that you have to pay for that, meaning through counseling and such. But, sometimes there are good friends that are, just really good at listening. Okay, prevention for burnout, taking regular retreats. In other words, finding times where you can have some fun, making a priority list or a to-do list, knowing what your failings are, your trappings, being able to say no, um, getting out or unhooking from things that you know are going to be causing you the stress, looking at your options, like, is there other ways that you can handle this, getting your priorities in order, and then using your energy positively and productively. All these are things that can help you manage the burnout that might be facing you. So, effects of perceived control. There had been a study back in the 90s that showed that uncontrollable stress produces the harshest stomach ulcers in humans. Stomach ulcer, usually that's kind of a pain in the stomach or burning. Needless to say, it can be very uncomfortable. But optimism seems to offer some protection against the effects of stress. And people who are optimists tend to recover more quickly from major surgeries like a heart surgery than people who are very pessimistic. And if you're trying to figure out if you're optimistic or pessimistic, it really kind of goes back to the old cliche of whether or not you see the glass as half full or half empty. So, needless to say, being optimistic helps you manage your stress. It can also keep your blood pressure lower than being negative about certain things that are happening in your lives. So when researchers have looked at like happiness, again, optimism, outgoing, agreeable, having friends, having a good marriage, having some work that requires your skills, kind of keeps you mentally engaged, but also having leisure activities that can help you kind of lift your spirit, sleeping well, exercising, and really having your faith, your religious faith. However, happiness is not so much related to things such as age or gender, parenting, physical attractiveness. So needless to say, cancer and stress. In one study, people with a history of workplace stress were 5 times more likely to develop colon cancer than those those without workplace stress. Cancer patients who verbalize their feelings, presumably releasing some of their stress, have a slightly higher survival rate than those who kind of keep their emotions in. But the truth is, berating someone or yelling at someone doesn't necessarily take the stress away. So we kind of have to like look at this maybe in the bigger picture here. Stress does not appear to create cancer, okay? But stress affects the body's ability primarily to fight cancer. So if you're fatigued and you're worn down, your immune system is going to have a harder time fighting back. So, stress and heart problems. Meyer Friedman and Ray Rosenman did some research in the mid 1950s, and they studied the eating habits of married white men living in the San Francisco area. And they discovered an interesting fact that the women ate just as much fat and cholesterol as their husbands, but the men were more likely to experience heart disease opposed to the women. And this kind of came up with an idea of maybe labeling personality types, getting into what we call the type A and type B personalities. And a type A person is a person who's very competitive, hard driving, impatient, maybe verbally aggressive. They're a little more anger prone, compared to maybe a type B who's a little more easygoing, a little more relaxed, not stressing out. And in a way, this had an impact on maybe the reasonings why some people had heart issues. So Friedman and Rosenman tracked 3,000 healthy men between ages 35 and 59, labeling each man either as a type A or a type B based on a 15-minute interview. And by the end of their study, which was about 9 years, 257 men had suffered heart attacks, and 69% of them were type A people. Okay. None of the people in the study group were purely type Bs, but most were kind of a little, easygoing. So, needless to say, those experiencing instant anger over minor annoyances, especially those with aggressive, reactive personalities, are probably more prone to have a heart attack. And a review of 57 studies showed that depression slightly increases the risk of death by heart attack as well. Cynical and hostile college students are 5 times more likely to die of a heart attack in their middle age years than those who are a little more trusting and gentler in their personality types. So when we talk about like type A, type B, what are some of the characteristics? And so a type A is kind of compulsive. They go out of their way to achieve. Their bodies are always in a state of stress. They might be a little more prone to illness. They have a tendency to be in a hurry and maybe smoke and drink, becoming easily angry. They're very time conscious. And they might be labeled as perfectionists compared to the type B, who are a little more easygoing, patient, mild mannered. They take their time, moderate drinking and eating habits. They enjoy hobbies. They're happy, not driven to achieve, and very forgiving. So, thank you very much.